I believe in you guys. You could get it to the right level. All right, if you have your Bibles, you can flip them open to Genesis chapter 1. If you don't, that's fine because we're actually going to be all over the Bible, so that was kind of a useless thing for me to say. But we're going to be doing a special Father's Day teaching today. So I hope that it does bless the dads out there and also encourage everybody else. So Genesis 1:27 says this: So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Last month, when it was Mother's Day, we took apart this verse and we talked about how the purpose of humanity, the reason why we're created, is to actually image forth the invisible character qualities of our invisible God. So that makes humanity, in essence, a type of priestly class within the earth. We are there to actually glorify our Father in heaven and show him forth to the creation at large. And if you notice, the fascinating thing about this particular passage is that it says that God made both male and female within his particular image. That means that gender and gender distinctions were actually created and crafted to glorify different specific, unique attributes of God. And those things come forth most prominently in the activity of marriage and parenthood. So for Mother's Day, we looked at what are the divine attributes of God that are uniquely shown forth in mothers. And today we're going to talk about what are the unique qualities within men that shine forth the unique qualities of God as our heavenly Father. Now, it is correct. I do like in our calendar that Mother's Day precedes Father's Day. The main reason being because motherhood in many ways precedes fatherhood. We talked about this a little bit last time during our Mother's Day teaching. But when a mother conceives of her child, she actually begins the process of being a mother while the child is still in the womb. Whereas the father doesn't actually get to meet the child until the child is outside the womb. And then even when the child is outside the womb, there's not much for the father to do, right? The kid basically just needs to be fed and changed and all that. So the dad could take on some changing responsibilities. He could tag the mom in and out, depending on how you guys feel about bottle feeding. But for the most part, there's not a whole lot for the father to do in the first 5 to 6 months of the kid's life. But around the 6th month, the fatherly role starts becoming more prominent and it becomes more important. And it is the natural complement of motherhood, and it is something that needs to be balanced out within any good and healthy home to properly bring up children. And so we're going to be going through the Bible and looking at times in which God describes himself specifically as our Father. And we're going to look at why those elements or attributes are ascribed to fatherhood as opposed to motherhood. And therefore, what is it that fathers contribute to the home that is so vital and important that we might encourage fathers to do so, and if we are fathers, to do a better job at these particular things. But like with Mother's Day, I'm going to talk about the bad before I get to the good. Ephesians 6, verse 4. And you, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in training and admonition of the Lord. Now, I like that word training. In the Greek, it's the word paideia. And it doesn't just refer to like discipline. It actually refers to the complete formation of a child from birth to adulthood. It talks about moral formation, character formation, and it also talks about intellectual formation. It is kind of the whole package when it comes to educating a child from childhood to adulthood. And what Paul is saying here is he's saying that fathers in some unique way can train up children. They can bring children from that infancy stage to their adult stage in a very unique way that mothers, not that they can't, but motherhood complements what the fathers are doing that allows for children to get there. However, it also says that dads can uniquely provoke their children to wrath. That's weird, right? So when Paul's talking about fatherhood, he's talking about the glories of fatherhood. He precedes his admonition with saying that dads specifically can actually provoke their children to wrath, seemingly in a way that mothers can't or mothers won't. And we're going to talk a little about why that is the case before we dive into some of the more positives. But just remember, like motherhood, it's not that fatherhood is bad. that it carries these negative consequences with it. It's actually because it is so good that when it's corrupted, it becomes infinitely bad. So the greater potential something has for positivity, it has an equal negative potential if it's corrupted. Right? This is why Satan is Satan. Satan is Satan because he was created for the highest possible good potential to shine forth God in his glory higher than any of the other angelic beings. But when he fell, he became the worst antagonistic force in the universe, because the greater potential something has for good, the greater potential it has for bad or ill. Because fatherhood has such an amazing divine purpose, when it is corrupted, or if it is corrupted, it becomes uniquely and almost cosmically bad. For this reason, a lot of people in our culture have attacked fatherhood for the past half a century or so, a little bit longer depending on where you reckon the starting point of this. We're a culture that's in a bit of a cultural revolution right now. We're trying to upset the old, what's come before, and we're trying to set up something new. And in order to revolt against what came before, you need kind of a target. You need a fixed point to assault. Fathers became the best attacking point because fathers represented what we call the patriarchy, right? This ascendancy of male dominance that has apparently oppressed and destroyed the world that we need to overthrow. And so fatherhood has become kind of like the picking point for the patriarchy. It's become like the stand-in for the patriarchy. So when you look at most movies made in the last half century or so, you're very rarely, it happens, but you're very rarely going to see a positive example of fatherhood. The majority of depictions of fatherhood is they're either bumbling oafs, right? They're kind of dumb, but they're well-meaning, or they're just totally off base and they need to be corrected or overthrown. I'm just going to take two movies for the sake of brevity, both of which I like, by the way, but both of which carry the same message that you can see very clearly: Frozen and Moana. So in the movie Frozen, the dad is intimidated by the daughter's blooming power, right? And the imagery is not very subtle, by the way. So the daughter has blooming power that the father is intimidated by, and because he's intimidated by it, he actually coerces her into repressing her power, and she has to overcome his patriarchal wisdom in order to step into what she was created to do, right? So you have a dad who's well-meaning, but his patriarchal influence has actually suppressed the feminine power, and she needs her sister to awaken that power within her. It's not a male that saves her. It's not a prince. It's her sister who brings that out. Moana, similar thing, right? Moana is made afraid of her potential by her dad as well, right? Her potential is to go out and to seek new lands, and her dad makes her afraid to do that. And it's her grandmother, the matriarch of the tribe, that brings out her potential and leads her on her quest. So in both instances, and again, it can go a little below our radar, but in both instances, what do you have? You have a misguided but well-meaning father figure who suppresses the power and the potential of the woman. And that power and potential needs to be brought out by a superior matriarchal figure, right? And that's just two examples, but again, do a little thinking when you get home. How many positive fathers can you think of when you think of movies made in the last half century or so? It's not many. Even the ones that are doing a good job are usually, they die pretty quickly, right? I'm thinking about Encanto or something like that, right? It's very, very rare when you have a positive father figure within a particular piece of media. This criticism of fatherhood has brought our culture to the point where we don't really see the benefits of fatherhood too much. We see it as almost superfluous, or we see it as something that's not a very big deal. And therefore, you're seeing an increase of dads stepping out of the home. So it's not hard to find. You could find stats on this all over the place because fatherlessness is growing. It's a growing epidemic. And even the fathers who stay in the home tend to not do the best job. And we'll talk more why in a second here. But this is an article by a guy named Jack Brewer called Fatherlessness and Its Effects in American Society. Listen to these stats. They're pretty shocking. Unfortunately, broken families, fatherlessness, and the government stepping in to take over traditional parenting duties, like instilling values, are an increasingly common fact of life in America. According to data from 2022, there are approximately 18.3 million children across America who live without a father in the home, comprising about 1 in 4 children. This number is a major international outlier, with the U.S. having the highest rate globally of children living in single-parent households. As of 2019, a staggering 23% of children lived with one parent and no other adults, which was over 3 times the global average of 7%, according to Pew Research. In China and India, this number stands at 3 to 4%, respectively. The stats are even more staggering for Black children, with nearly 50% living with a single mother. Overall, single mothers head up 80% of single-parent households. Sadly, fatherless families are 4 times more likely to raise children in poverty, and research suggests that 84% of homeless families are headed by women. Now, if you keep going through the entire article, and like I said, it's not hard to find these. They're all over the place. You can see that fatherlessness or negative father figures within a home are the single best predictors for children ending up in the criminal system, for children ending up in low education situations, or children ending up in poverty-stricken situations. Fatherlessness is a huge epidemic in our world, and it's becoming increasingly worse as we as a culture start or continue to criticize fatherhood in its totality. Now, there's a well-meaning reason why this is happening, right? So there's some more negative reasons, which I'm not going to talk about because I try to be generous, but there's well-meaning reasons for why we're doing this. As fatherlessness increases, we are trying as a culture to give aid and comfort to those who have experienced negative father figures. So in other words, if we sit around talking about how great fatherhood is, that will alienate and make people who have negative experiences with their dads feel more, I guess you could call it, shameful, hurt, and compromised as a result of what happened between them and their own fathers. So as a culture, it does make sense for us to say, well, if this is happening at such an increasing rate, to the point where over half of all just like Black children are raised without a father, doesn't it make sense for us as a culture to not glorify fatherhood so that those kids who grow up in those negative situations aren't made to feel shameful for it? So that's like the positive reason as to why someone might do that. But biblically, that reasoning doesn't actually pan out. 2 Corinthians 6, verse 18, I will be a father to you, and you shall be my sons and daughters, says the Lord Almighty. Fatherhood is not a social construct. It's not something we designed as a human society because we felt like it. Fatherhood reflects something eternal and infinite. Fatherhood reflects a very essence of God and his relationship to us as his people. In fact, within the Trinity, fatherhood has always existed. There has never been a time, whether you go before the creation or after the creation, there has never been a time in the cosmos in which fatherhood has not been a relevant fact of reality. And therefore, we cannot just sign it off as something superfluous, something that people can just get over in simplicity. It's something fundamental to us. God has designed us as human beings to experience fatherly love first through our earthly fathers and then through him. The manifestation of God's fatherly love comes first through earthly fathers. And when that is denied to somebody, that's not something small that they could just simply get over. That is something large and infinite. There is a glory that they have been denied that is astronomically large. Now, it doesn't mean that people can't heal from that, but it does mean that we as a society have to acknowledge, what are they healing from? How big a deal is it that they had an abusive or negligent or absent father? If we're not willing to reckon with that, then we have actually deprived someone with the means of healing in general. To put it another way, is losing a father or having a negligent father, is it like losing an appendix or is it like losing a kidney? If it's like losing your tonsils or your appendix, well then who cares? It doesn't really matter. It's a superfluous organ within your body that you'll get over. But if it's like losing a kidney, that's something that's going to, yeah, you got another one, but that's something that's going to affect you for the rest of your life. You can cope without it, but it's something that actively affects you if you're denied it. It's actually not sympathetic to people who have been hurt by their fathers to pretend like fatherhood is no big deal. It denies them the very mechanism they need to be able to appropriately heal. Beyond that, God wants to relate to us as our Heavenly Father. If your father wounds never heal, you'll never be able to relate to God on that basis. You're being denied one of the most beautiful, powerful, and incredible elements of God's love simply because of the failures of your own father. And again, those wounds can heal, but we have to acknowledge what the wounds are before they can heal. Psalm 126, verse 5 says this: "Those who sow in tears shall reap in joy." Jesus also said, "Blessed are those who mourn, for you will be comforted." Comfort, healing, and growth only come first through acknowledgement and sorrow. Right? The pathway through joy, unfortunately, goes through the valley of tears. So we have to do it. We have to acknowledge what it is. And we also have to acknowledge it because fatherhood is an infinite good. So in the Bible, we get peeks or glimpses at what we call virtues. These would be things like, most of you guys know, the fruit of the Spirit, or you could recite the song that you learned in Sunday school. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, and self-control. These are all virtues of Christianity. These are things that God intends for us to exhibit on this earth. The higher the virtue, though, the more difficult it is to exhibit. So is it hard to exhibit something like honesty? Yeah, that takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of work. It's harder to exhibit something higher than that, like, let's say, courage. And therefore, any virtue that you're trying to exhibit as a human being, it requires training. That's why Ephesians 6 begins with that. Fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in training in the admonition of the Lord. Being a father is an incredible virtue. It reflects something so unique and beautiful about God. That means that to practice that virtue requires a lot of effort and training. It doesn't just happen. And so people who are denied good examples, even well-meaning men who are denied good godly examples, will not be able to grow up to be fathers. They'll instead be lesser mothers, which is unfortunately something that's happening in large quantities right now. Because men don't know what it means to be fathers, they're becoming lesser versions of mothers. And we're having an almost entirely effeminate raising program within our society. Which again, the feminine is not bad, just as the masculine is bad. But they are meant to complement one another. Because in the complementary nature of the genders comes the fullness of the Godhead. Without it, there's no other way. So young men need godly examples of fathers. And we see this kind of quasi-adoptive perspective within the Bible. So Paul is a good example of this. Paul actually adopts, in a sense, Timothy. And he becomes a father figure for him, and he raises him up in godliness as a result. And here we get a hint that one of the ways that you heal from having a negative father figure in your own life is to experience positive fatherhood from somebody else in your life. That's one of the best ways that you can heal from the wounds of your past. You have to embrace the good qualities of fatherhood that you were denied through a different avenue. Even if that avenue is simply watching that person and seeing how they behave. It's a bummer that they divorced, but Kelly Clarkson, when she was married to her husband, she wrote a song that I actually thought was pretty good. Kelly Clarkson is a fairly talented artist. She wrote a song called Piece by Piece, in which she talks about that. She talks about how having a positive father in her home, exemplified by her husband, piece by piece healed the wounds that were left upon her by her own dad. So positive father figures can heal the wounds of negative father figures, but only if those wounds are acknowledged and they're seen for what they are. So I know that within this room, there are definitely a lot of people that have been denied positive father figures. And that's why, again, as difficult as it is to have this conversation, or maybe even Father's Day is a difficult day for you in general, it's a good conversation to have. Because your healing is going to come through appropriate mourning. So what are the things that fathers are great at? What are the things that dads really do well, that they need space and room to shine? I'll give you 3. Fathers are great at discipline. Fathers are great at helping kids overcome fear and anxiety. And fathers are great at teaching children how to control power. So let's take them each in succession. Let's start with godly discipline. Hebrews 12, verse 5 through 7. And you have forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as sons. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens, and scourges every son whom he receives. If you endure chastening, God deals with you as sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? The role of discipline in the Bible is assumed to be a fatherly role. It's something that dads excel at, if you want to put it that way. It's something that we preternaturally are good at over our counterpart of our wives. And I'll explain why in a second. But let's real quick talk about why this concept of discipline is just tough for us. So if you have a father wound, the concept of discipline is going to hit you bad. And one of the big reasons why it's going to hit you bad is because discipline was probably abused in your life. It was either completely neglected or it was turned into actual abuse. And therefore, again, as a culture, we have been very critical of discipline in general. Now, this isn't new. I'm going to read you a quote from a guy named Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a French dude, back in the day, wrote a book called Emile, and it's like an old school parenting book. If you're tired of the parenting books that are coming out today, you could read Emile. You know, it came out in the 1700s, maybe a tough read for you. It was written originally in French, but you could get a good idea of where the current trajectory of parenting books came from. And this is what he says in Emile. Let us lay it down as an incontrovertible rule that the first impulses of human nature are always right. There is no original sin in the human heart. The how and why of the entrance of every vice can be traced. What's he saying? Children are born good. There's no need for discipline within the home. As a matter of fact, it's the discipline that leads to low self-esteem in children that creates vice. It creates problem. You see, it's the oppressive rule of the patriarchy that moves people into sin, but they're not innately sinful. So if we remove paternal power, we create an equitable society in which people don't struggle with self-loathing. That was his idea. It's very old, but let me give you a current person who thinks this way. This is the current Lieutenant Governor of Minnesota, Peggy Flanagan. When our children tell us who they are, it is our job as grown-ups to listen and to believe them. That is what is meant by being a parent. This is a pretty mainstream view, that parenthood is not about discipline. Parenthood is simply about shaping the preternatural tendencies of your children. It's simply taking what is special and unique about them and drawing it to the surface. Now, we'll talk more about this as we go, but that is not actually a bad idea. It is simply the feminine idea of parenting applied to men. That's what that is. The feminine version of love is the unconditional, compassionate love that we see throughout the text of Scripture. Right? Mothers love their children unconditionally like nobody else. That's why it's kind of a joke sometimes, where when you produce something that's not very good, someone's like, well, I'm sure your mom likes it, right? That's a sign of like, the only person who's going to love it is your mother, because she loves you for who you are. But anyone who loves you for what you can do, they're not going to like what you just did. That's the idea of motherhood. Mothers unconditionally love their children like nobody else. They care for their kids more than anybody else. They're compassionate towards their kids more than anybody else. And they have empathy for their children more than anybody else. Mothers feel what their kids feel. They have to. Because for the first, like I said, the entirety of pregnancy, they are communing with their children within the womb. They're learning what their kids like, what they don't like. They're learning their personality. And then when the child comes into the world, the mother is so tuned in to the behavior of the child that they can sense the needs of the kid without being told, because they can't be told. The kids can't talk yet. Dads, on the other hand, were created less empathetic. Now, some see that as a defect, because again, we're in a matriarchal society that sees men as lesser versions of women. By the way, when it was a patriarchal society, it was the opposite. Women were seen as lesser versions of men. But today, that is seen as a defect. That men are less empathetic than women is seen as a defect of men, but it's actually not. Let me read two passages that explain why it's not, and then we'll get back into this concept of discipline. Psalm 51, verse 5. Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin my mother conceived me. Is sin something that is natural to humanity, or is it something that's learned? It's something natural. Unfortunately, we're born fallen. That's why it's such an important concept, right? There are so many people in our culture today that think that it doesn't matter what you believe religiously. We could all agree about what's good for kids. That's not true. The belief in original sin will radically change the way that you raise your kids versus someone who believes that kids are born naturally good. It will absolutely change the way that you deal with kids. Proverbs 22, verse 15. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction will drive it far from them. Again, it's assumed that your kid is foolish. It's not assumed that they're wise and they just need help kind of governing their wisdom. It is assumed that they're not very wise. They're a little bit on the foolish side. And anyone who's hung out with a kid for any length of time will tell you that. Your kids are kind of dumb, They're cute, they're awesome, they're amazing, but they're kind of dumb. Well, by the way, let me give you a quick definition of foolishness for you from the biblical perspective. So you can read the entire book of Proverbs, which is very fascinating. I encourage you to do it. I'm going to give you a very overly simplistic definition, though, okay? According to the book of Proverbs, God has created and organized the world according to his nature. So there's you could call it a pattern to the creation. Wisdom is someone who understands the pattern of the creation and is able to live within it. Foolishness is someone who is ignorant to the pattern of creation and can't live within it. So it's different than wickedness, but there's similarities and crossover. So let me put it this way. Gravity is a fundamental part of nature. It's something that God has put into the world. Do kids understand gravity? Parents, do kids understand gravity? Not really. They're little death machines. They're little suicide machines running around. They don't understand gravity at all, right? They could fall 15 times. My son will fall 10 times in the same exact way, and he will try the same stunt again. He doesn't get that what is happening is, well, son, there's such thing as called gravity. And your face is soft. And when it hits this, it's going to hurt a little, right? He doesn't get it, right? He doesn't understand these natural consequences yet. And so as a parent, you have to teach him. That's what the proverb is saying. It's bound up in his heart. He doesn't get it. And you need to train him in wisdom by teaching him, don't do this. And this is where the discipline comes in. What the discipline does is it manifests an immediate consequence to behavior that nature would take a much longer time teaching your child. Okay? So think about fire, right? As a kid, every kid's a pyro, especially young boys. They're pyros, they love fire, they just want to touch it because it looks so dang pretty. As a parent, you got two options. You can either let your kid put their face in the fire, or you can stop them and discipline them. Okay? Because the consequence of putting their head in the fire is a little too high, most parents opt for the spanking or the timeout or something like that. There's an immediate discipline that is intended to teach a long-term consequence. That's what discipline is supposed to do. Same with lying, stealing, right? Kids that, I can't remember the stat, but it's something like 2-year-olds are the most violent criminal people in our society. We don't think of it because they're 2, right? But if a 40-year-old acted the way that my son does, he would be in prison. Absolutely. Right? He'll just walk up to you and take stuff out of your hands. If he doesn't like it, he'll smack you, right? He'll cry to get his way. He is a sociopath. No, I'm just kidding. But there's something bound up in his heart that I need to discipline out. That's something that is a truism about his nature. But it's going to take a long time for nature to actually teach him those consequences. He doesn't understand that behavior is a bit of a put-off to other people yet. He thinks that everybody loves him. The world is just accepting him as he is because he's got mother love to teach him that. He needs a little father love to teach him, not necessarily, boy. We love you just as you are, but we also want you to be better. That's what father love is, if you want to put it a nice little bow on it. Mother love teaches you that you are loved just as you are. Father love teaches you that you have potential for more. So when mother love goes out of bounds, kids are spoiled and entitled. When father love goes out of bounds, kids are pushed too hard and they don't know they're loved. But when they're complemented, when they come together, when they're complemented correctly, kids get the bounds of safety that mother love creates. They know they're loved as they are, but then they also know they could be more. When you put those two loves together, you actually get godly growth. By the way, if you struggle, right, if you were either over-mothered or over-fathered, you'll notice that your relationship with God has a bit of that projection upon it. Right? So if you're over-fathered, you might struggle with feeling as though you don't measure up to God's standards, and you might feel unloved a lot. If mother love was overdone for you, you might feel entitled to God's love and not feel the need to repent ever. So that when they're put together correctly, though, you get the right combination. Fathers are great at discipline. Why are fathers so good at discipline? Well, I'll give you the big reason. When we talk about empathy, when a child is crying, a mother doesn't just hear it, she feels it. It pains her for her child to cry. That means that when the mother inflicts discipline on the child, it actually pains her. Dads, not so much, right? So when my son cries, does it bother me? Yeah, but it's not like my wife. I can tell you that. It's not like my wife. Weirdly, God has designed me that way. He's designed men to not be so bothered by their children's cries. So what the mother is supposed to do, ladies, when your kid is born, you have about 3 to 6 months to teach your husband empathy for the child. That's your job. You're supposed to do it. Most women don't. They just get tired of their husbands because their husbands are just like, they can actually tune out the crying. And they're like, you're lazy. No, they're not. Maybe they are, but maybe they're not, right? Maybe what's happening is they're tuning out the crying because they can. You have 3 to 6 months to actually train your husband to be more empathetic to your child. Why 6 months? Because at 6 months, your child's going to become a little self-conscious and they're going to start getting into trouble. And there's going to need to be discipline. Now, the discipline at first is very small, right? It's not going to be actual physical, or it's not going to be grounding because they're not ready for that yet. But it'll be simple things. You'll be trying to teach your kid like the word no. That's a very good thing to try to teach your kid before they're a year old, right? But little things you could do as a dad to slowly guide your child into the appropriate development that they need to be in. The main reason why that's so important is Jeremiah 2, verse 19, your own wickedness will correct you, and your backslidings will rebuke you. If as a dad, I don't discipline my child correctly, what's going to happen is their own sin is going to correct them. They're going to go to the playground and nobody's going to want to play with them because they're going to be selfish and entitled and rude and obnoxious, and no kid is going to want to be around them. And no adult is going to want to watch them because they're too crazy. I've now set up my child to live in a world where they're already rejected. They're going into a world in which all the adults around them are putting on fake smiles, and all the kids around them are mean to them and disrespectful. I've actually damaged my son. I've damaged my daughter if I don't appropriately discipline them. Natural consequences are a form of discipline, but they're supposed to be used in a limitation to what your child can handle. Okay, so it's good, like if my son does something and other kids are mean to them back, it's good for me to use that as a teaching moment. It's not good for me to allow them to be senselessly bullied in a massive way, right? So there's limitations to what I'm supposed to allow as a father. But again, the over-mothering that's happening in our culture isn't allowing for that. Everyone has to be on the same team. Everybody's a winner, right? Everybody gets a trophy, right? That's mother love gone amok, right? That's what's happening right there. It's like we're going to make sure everyone's picked for the same team, everyone's playing, everyone has a chance to play. It's a natural consequence for kids who are unlikable to not be played with. It's a harsh one, and we should try to prevent that. But when you force kids to play with kids they don't like, kids don't have much of a filter. You know what they're going to do to that kid? Right? Do you really think that they're going to play fair with that kid, or they're going to be nice to them? Right? So we think we're doing a good thing, right? Everybody plays. Everybody's a winner, right? But we're not doing a good thing. We're actually setting up those children for absolute failure and neglect, and they're not going to understand why. Right? When I counsel someone who's, some people I counsel are 60s, 70s, and they don't even know that the reason why people don't want to be around them is because of them. They've never made that connection. Their whole life, they've just believed that the world is against them in some weird cosmic way. And it's like a kick in the teeth for them to learn, like, no, the world's not against you. They're against your behavior. They're not against you as a person. They're against what you're doing. And they don't even understand that. We're supposed to be able to teach kids that. And father love is supposed to be the main thing that the child learns. So once again, when father love is pushed too far or it goes out of bounds, it can be cold, neglectful, apathetic, and it could be overly domineering. It could push kids too far. It could be overly authoritative. They can always feel as though they can never measure up. When motherhood goes too far, kids are, again, they're smothered. They're put into many safe spaces. They're not allowed to be challenged. They're not allowed to grow or be autonomous or independent. But when they come together, you actually get positive parenting that can train up a child in the way they should go. Number 2, conquering fear. Numbers 14, verse 2 through 3. And all the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, if only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if only we had died in the wilderness. Why has the Lord brought us to the land to fall to the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? This is an interesting story. So in the book of Numbers, what's happening is the people of Israel are about to go into the land of Canaan and conquer it. And in order to provide a little bit of intel, Moses allows for 12 spies to go into the land. Some of you guys know this story. They go into the land, they spy it out. 2 of them bring back a good report, Joshua and Caleb. 10 of them say, yeah, the land is good, but it's populated with giants. We cannot win. We need to leave. We need to flee. Notice, though, they don't own their own fears. They don't say, hey, we're afraid. Those guys look really tough. Let's take off. What do they say? Why has the Lord brought us to the land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? What are they doing? They're taking their internal fears and they're projecting them onto their kids. You know what the consequence for this is? God says, guess what? Because you're going to hide behind your children, which is the opposite of what you should do as a man, you're going to die and your kids are going to go on the land. That's the consequence. God doesn't put up with it. God sees right through it. He's like, you're not afraid for your kids, you're afraid for yourself. And you're hiding behind your children. Projecting fears upon kids is one of the cruelest things that we could do to them. Now, fathers are designed. Again, this is a fatherly attribute that is being here. It was a failure of fathers in the book of Numbers, and God calls it as such. But the success of fathers is to do the opposite. It is to actually train your kids into overcoming their innate fears and balancing it out. To put it another way, fathers are there to teach their kids courage. Now, there's a bit of a debate about how this works, but when I was a kid, there was a little bit of a general, wisdom that was going around. And it was essentially that kids are reckless innately, and they need to be filled with fear, basically. Right? So parents are like, we need to make them afraid of strangers, we need to make them afraid of heights, we need to make them afraid of everything on the planet, we just make them terrified of, and then they'll live correctly. In fact, there was a whole program designed by this, Scared Straight. You guys may have heard of that. Right? So the idea is that kids are reckless, and the only way to get them to act correctly is to freak them out. You scare them, and then they're going to be able to act correctly. Once again, that was clearly designed by someone who doesn't have kids. Are kids a little reckless? Yeah, but they're reckless because they don't know they ought to be afraid of something. It's not because they're actually courageous. Once kids learn that there's something to be afraid of, they are very, very scared. And they are crippled by their fear. They don't have a mechanism to overcome fear. They're afraid of fake things. That's why it's the monster in the closet and stuff like that. They'll have nightmares. Kids don't know how to regulate fear. When you ply kids with fear as a parenting strategy, you know what you end up with? Anxious kids. Fearful kids. We have the most anxious generation right now on record. We're breaking records. We should feel proud of that. Maybe not. Kids need to learn not what to be afraid of, but what fears are worthy and what fears are unworthy. They need to be able to learn courage, and that's what courage is. Courage is not an absence of fear. Courage is knowing or giving the proper respect to reality and knowing what things are worth overcoming. That's what courage is. Fathers are very good at doing this. Mothers, not so much. This is not a hit on motherhood, but it is a balance of what mothers and fathers are designed to do. Think about it. When your kid is the first 6 months, you need to remove every danger in front of them. Because again, they're little suicide machines and they will do something that will seriously injure them or kill them. Mothers need to remove all dangers from children within the first 6 months. But as they grow up, they need more danger in their life so that they can learn what things are worth being afraid of and what things are worth overcoming. I have this, it's my favorite image ever. I hope you could put it up. This is a playground from the early 1900s. Is that the coolest thing you've ever seen? A man obviously created this. There's no way a woman had anything to do with this design. I love it though, right? So early 1900s, this is what kids were playing on. No plastic equipment. No, this is not even like the tire mulch at the bottom. This is just like, man, if you fall, you're going home with a bit of a cast, right? So now most mothers would look at that and they would say, what's the point? Why let kids risk their safety to play a game? That doesn't make any sense. Why not protect them and insulate them from harm? Well, here's what you figure out very quickly when you start studying child development. Children need a little bit of danger to learn their own strength. So if I were to put a bunch of kids on that playground right there, you would see the older ones would be very bored with that setup. Once they're the age of 10, there's not much for them to do over there. So you know what they're going to do? They're going to use the equipment inappropriately. Right? They're going to, instead of going down the slide, they're going to go up the slide. They're going to climb on top of it. They're going to do everything they're not supposed to be doing on the playground. Why? Because they're testing themselves. They're getting encouraged. They're learning through this kind of rough and tumble play how to develop themselves as human beings. So if a mom is watching kids play inappropriately on the equipment, what's she going to do? Knock it off. Stop it. Get down from there. If a dad is going to watch kids do it, he might just sit back and he might watch what's going to happen, right? And if the kid gets hurt, the mother's going to come and be like, why didn't you stop them? I don't know. He's not going to have a good answer because innately he knows, but he can't express it. Why isn't he doing anything about it? Because he knows kids don't need to be protected from all harm. There's certain harms they need to be protected from, but certain harms they need to face so that they can learn courage. And if they're protected from all harm and they're insulated from all danger, they never learn courage. They never learn courage. This is another big reason why the current generation is retreating to the digital space. They're retreating to the digital space because the real world is too scary for them. They don't want to go ask a girl out. That's terrifying. They don't want to get said no to. They want to swipe right. That's all they want to do, right? Put your picture out there. People swipe left or right. That is a low-risk proposition. But you know what? The greatest rewards on the planet come through high-risk propositions. You have to put yourself out there. You have to be willing to risk something. And in this no-risk world that we live in, we're ending up with no world at all. There's a fascinating paper that came out. I thought it was super funny. You could find it. I can't remember the name of the tribe, but this tribe in South America got internet for the first time. And they've been like living next to the river, the Amazon River, and they've been hanging out for centuries, just fishing and hunting, no modern technology. They had to hike like 10 miles with backpacks and bring out the Starlink, the Elon Musk thing. They brought that out to them. It immediately devastated their culture. They've had it for 9 months, and it's just devastated their culture. And they're like, all the kids want to do is play games, and unfortunately for the young boys, they just want to look at illicit photos online. And it's just like absolutely radically destroying their culture because they subsist on people hunting and fishing. And if the kids just want to game all day, guess what? Everyone starves to death, right? They've only had it for 9 months, and it's just destroying their community, right? Because it's low risk, but it also gives access to something that feels like risk, and it feels like achievement. That's what online spaces do. In order to get kids off the online space, if you as a parent want to do that, they need to be courageous enough to do that. It is terrifying to step out into the real world and face genuine risk. But that's what fathers are supposed to do. They're supposed to prepare their children for genuine risk. And sometimes they do it with what we would call hands-off parenting. So again, some wives are like, oh, my husband, he just like lets the kids play. Yeah, but he's doing that on purpose. Sometimes it's laziness, but sometimes it's on purpose. It's intentional. I want the kids to learn how to entertain themselves, how to deal with boredom, how to deal with anxiety, how to overcome problems in their own strength and wisdom. I don't want to coddle them. Now, what usually ends up happening is parents work against one another as opposed to with one another. So the wife will see the dad being, as she views it, too hard, too negligent, and too passive with the kids. So she compensates by being more coddling to the kids. Then the dad compensates for the wife by being even harder on the kids. So now, instead of having complementary parents, instead of having the dad becoming more effeminate and the mom becoming more masculine, you have the dad becoming ultra masculine and the mom becoming ultra feminine. You have parents that are working against one another as opposed to with one another. Now look at how God puts these things together. I love this. Hosea 11, verse 1 through 4. When Israel was a child, I loved them. And out of Egypt I called my son, as they called them. So they went from them. They sacrificed to the Baals and burned incense to the carved images. I taught Ephraim to walk, taking them by their arms, but they did not know that I had healed them. I drew them with gentle cords, with bands of love. And I was to them as those who take the yoke from their neck. I stooped and fed them. See that perfect balance of masculinity and femininity coming from God? You have the femininity. I drew them with gentle cords. I drew them with bands of love. I stooped and I fed them. I took the yoke from their neck. But then you have the masculine. I took them by the arms. I taught them to walk. Which I love that image, by the way, because that is such a dad thing. Or when you watch moms try to teach their kids how to walk, they usually hold hands, right? And they walk with them. Dads, they just pick them up and they're just like, go for it, kid. And the kid will just face plant over and over again, right? That's the difference. God is providing them a zone of safety where they can learn, but then he's allowing them to walk. He's allowing them to grow up, to become more independent through putting them on their own 2 feet and allowing them to try to walk on their own. So that's the correct balance that we see displayed there. Next, controlling power. And I got to go through this one fast because I went too long. Proverbs 1, verse 8 through 11. My son, hear the instruction of your father and do not forsake the law of your mother. For they will be a graceful ornament upon your head and chains about your neck. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent if they say, come with us, let us lie in wait to shed blood. Let us lurk secretly for the innocent without cause. What's happening here? A father is training his son not to give in to bad influences, or teaching the kid that power is a means of taking what you want from the innocent and unsuspecting. Men, especially, are drawn to power at levels that women are not. Right? I don't have time to get into all the stats, but you can look them up. They're pretty widely available as to what kind of jobs, especially in the Scandinavian countries, men and women pursue. But men are drawn to power more than women are, at just a natural level. Because of that, men, if they are not taught how to use power well, they become oppressive and dictatorial, which is what we tend to be afraid of when it comes to fathers. Fathers who take power and use it in an oppressive, aggressive, even violent way towards those around them. And that's what's happening in Proverbs 1, verse 8. But notice, the father is not telling the son power is a bad thing. He's instead telling him that is not the appropriate usage of power. Power is not there for you to take what you want. Power is there to give to others what they are needing. In our culture, because we have attacked and assaulted the concept of power, we're afraid of the patriarchy, we're afraid of authoritative men. We've essentially left young men wide open to tyrannical and predatory people. I remember even years ago, Denzel Washington was interviewed about this, and he gave a really fascinating answer, because they were talking about gang violence where he came from, right, the city he grew up in. And he says, when kids don't have a father in the home, they find one on the streets. And he said it very simply, but that's what he meant. He said, if they don't have someone in the house that's going to teach them how to use their power well, they're going to find someone on the streets that's going to teach them to use their power exploitatively. That's, again, why fatherlessness tends to be a pipeline to criminality within our culture. There are plenty of people out there that will teach young men how to use their power to oppress others, if there aren't men who are willing to step up and teach men how to use their strength to help others. Jordan Peterson, who's a psychologist, in his book, 12 Rules for Life, he says this: if you think tough men are dangerous, wait until you see what weak men are capable of. Right? So tough men are men who are learning how to control their power well and use it to help others. Weak men are those who are never taught how to do that. And they don't become passive. They don't become gentle. They become aggressive and violent if they're not taught the correct and appropriate way to do this. Another interesting section, this is from the Mishnah. It's like an oral tradition of the Jews. It says this: who is strong? He who conquers his evil inclination. As it is said, better is one slow to anger than a strong man, and one who rules over his own spirit than a conqueror of a city. What's true power? It's not the ability to oppress and dominate other people. It's the ability to control yourself. And that's what men need to learn how to do, to control their own anger, to control their own strength, so that, again, they can use it in the service of other people as opposed to their own ends. The time when society had the best balance, and you can look this up, is the time of the knights. That's why we tend to look back at it as such a great time. What was happening during the time of the knights? Chivalry. Men learning that their power was there to help and aid the weak and the defenseless. And we learn this from the gospel, and I'll end with this. The most full and incredible expression of power from God was not in the creation of the world, and it won't be in the judgment of the world. Where was it? 1 Corinthians 1, verse 18. For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. The power of God was not displayed when God did something amazing and incredible, in the sense of like expressing power in that domineering way. The power of God was most widely expressed in the submission of the Son to crucifixion, that by his stripes we're all healed. That's what genuine fatherhood is supposed to teach the next generation: how to subordinate power to the betterment of those around them and not to use it for the oppression of others. Let's pray. God, we want to thank you that you are our great Heavenly Father, that you love us with that eternal love, you love us with that incredible love, that you have that unconditional element to you, that you love us exactly as we are. But Lord, you also see potential in us that you desire to draw out. God, so I pray that we would not be people who despise your discipline, but we would be people who welcome it, that we might learn to control our natures to serve you and to serve others. Lord, I pray for the fathers in the room, that they would be encouraged in their role as fathers within the home, that they would learn how to be more effective at their role, that they wouldn't become overly burdened by their own struggles and difficulties, but they would learn how to deal with them, that they could rule their house well. God, we're very thankful for the example that you've given to us. We love you, Lord, and in your name, amen. All right, so now we're going to have a time of